I think we all know Repak, so it's going to be very interesting to hear the perspective of the membership manager of Repak. So could we please have a warm welcome for Colm Munnelly.
Hello everyone, nice to be here. I work with Repak, and even some of the names that have already been mentioned, particularly the retailers and the manufacturers, we do a lot of work with them. I suppose the first thing to mention is that even thinking about the situation in terms of waste even 20 years ago, when a lot of the waste legislation was brought in the 90s, and I remember my grandparents would say glass jam jars on the window shelf, and my grandmother using a reusable or returnable trolley to bring goods home. At the same time, we were recycling less than 10% of what we were producing. We had hundreds of landfills across the country, and that situation thankfully has changed. And one of the things, I suppose, even the example that we were talking about earlier in terms of Aldi, when Aldi were in that situation years ago there too, there wasn't any other option. Thankfully, what I do is I represent a producer responsibility scheme, and what that means is that a number of businesses, whether they're manufacturers or retailers, get together and say, well, what can we do in terms of improving the recyclability of the packaging and the material that we produce? And the two ways of doing that really are to either report directly through to your local authority or else to join a group scheme, and we're the group scheme. And within that group scheme, the manufacturers and the retailers are contributing millions, and those millions are used to basically fund the green bins, the bottle banks, the bring centres around the country. So that's where that money is going. Now, obviously, I think that message doesn't carry through, and people don't actually see the work that's been done there too. And it's something we talk about a lot, but I'm not going to labour it. I'll just show you some of the other things that are going on there too. Now, that's the good news, I suppose. There are still problems. And I'm going to talk about some of those as well. And I suppose I joined Repak about 11 years ago at this stage, and I'm a packaging technologist. And one of the things I do in terms of helping businesses is saying, look, we want to reduce the amount of packaging we produce. We want to make the best use of the packaging that we have. But to do that, you really have to understand the functions of packaging, and that's really what it's all about. So if anybody here or has any doubts about what something is doing on their food product there too with the packaging, it should be doing one of these, one or more of these, plenty of these actually. And if we can look at these and say, well, that's what it's doing, are there ways of improving it? Can we improve something in one area and not have a negative effect on the other areas? But this is really the game in terms of what we're trying to do. So what we're trying to do is optimise packaging. And to optimise packaging, what we're doing is we're looking at all of these, seeing are these functions being met, and if we make reductions and if we remove particular parts of packaging or do it, are we going to have any effects on what's going on here? Okay. This was already mentioned a little bit. In terms of the legislation when it came in first, the primary concern from a lot of people from the mid-90s and moving on from that was recycling of packaging. But this fits into this thing in terms of the packaging waste hierarchy here, where we're looking at the best option against the worst option. So prevention, at this stage we're talking about preparing for reuse. And let's say some of the systems that would have been in place years ago to prevent material from going into dumps and from going into landfills was reuse. So there's definitely scope for improving some of the reuse systems that are in place at the moment, and it's one of the things that we can look at as well. Another thing I suppose to mention is that we are definitely part of a global market these days. So we are talking about, importing products from all over the world, getting them here. To get them here, we have to fulfill the functions of packaging I just mentioned in the previous slide there too, and to get them to the consumer in the state that they want. So, as I'm saying, originally we were looking at recycling. We are looking for better reuse options. Ultimately, we're looking for prevention of waste and the best possible packaging that we have around the products that are there as well. Moving down, we do have recovery in terms of energy recovery, but even the legislation on that is changing. So there's going to be much more emphasis, let's say, from recycling up here in the future. So recyclable packaging, again, something that's a particular concern at the moment. And one of the things I'd say is that all packaging is recyclable. So that's not something that kind of, you think about easily. But there's a big but, and the big but is in terms of all of the other things. Why isn't it being recyclable? If all packaging is recyclable, why isn't it? So the economics, moving the material around, the technology behind how stuff is being recycled, the location. Okay, I can recycle it, but where am I going to recycle it? If I go to the bother of actually recycling this material, is there an end market for it? And then other things in terms of the transport issues all the way through here in terms of the environmental factors. Just because something is recycled doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the best environmental outcome from it. And then one of the other things, I suppose, just to try and shift the thinking a little bit, is when we talk about the supply chain, like for years we're talking about manufactured products and getting it all the way through to the consumer, and the consumer is the end goal. But really what we're looking at here is the consumer's right in the middle of what we're talking about. We're trying to look at in terms of design of packaging, what happens to packaging once you have used it, once the consumer is finished with it, what happens to it then? And I suppose 20 years ago we were talking about once it went in the bin, once it went in the dump, that was the end of it. But we now have, say, waste collection authorities, MRFs or material recycling facilities, people who are reprocessing the material, energy from waste recovery operators, ultimately down to try and get to waste disposal authorities. So again, just to mention the point that I think there are 3 landfills in the country at the moment compared to the hundreds that we used to have. So there is a huge amount of work that's actually going on to get packaging optimised, to get it recycled, but there are problems. And I suppose one of the things about problems is in the last while we're talking about plastics in particular. When I went into Repak first, I spent a huge amount of time encouraging people into the lightest, most efficient, most economical packaging there is. And in a lot of positions, you're actually recommending plastics at that stage. Now we're in a position when we're looking at the difficulties with plastics and we're saying, well, we're going to have to rethink this. So we're looking at recyclability, we're looking at prevention. If we are in a position where we're going to be moving from recycling of, say, where we're going to be taking out plastic material, which is the lightest that's there, and we're looking at some of the alternatives, one of the obvious knock-on consequences of that is we're going to be increasing the weight of the actual packaging waste that we have. So we have to be careful about that there too. This is just on some of the questions we were asked to think about here there too. Reducing food wastage, the role of packaging that's there too. So obviously we need to constantly review the functions of the packaging that are there. Reducing this complexity in the supply chain. So we're looking at if we want to eat pineapples in Dublin in November, there's packaging on that to get it in the condition that we want it. So yes, there are a lot of work going on in terms of the manufacturers and the retailers, but there are choices in here for the consumer as well. Increasing consumer access to food data, definitely a problem. People are looking for more information. We want more information on the different types of material, what can be done with it, whether it's recyclable or not. And even to get to the situation where we're going to be putting that clearly on packaging is not clear cut. And then, like, what are we trying to do? Reducing the impact of packaging on the environment. So yes, we need functional, well-designed packaging. One of the things that came up earlier where we were talking about this is, the fact that packaging is getting more complex. Yes, but to recycle more of it, we actually need simpler materials. We want it going into simple streams. And if there's any message that I can say is that's what we are trying to do. From a manufacturer and a retail point of view, there are systems in place in terms of the streams to recycle this material, but we have to get the material into those streams. That means reducing litter, marine litter everywhere else there too, and getting it into the situation where we have materials that are easily recyclable, where we do have a chance to actually turn them into products that we can use again and also make it economical. So the final point on that then is we all have a role to play in this in terms of producers, consumers and regulatory authorities as well. Thank you.